What if you woke up tomorrow and the ocean was just gone? No waves, no tides, no horizon of blue. Just an empty, yawning bowl of earth stretching thousands of miles, covered in salt, wrecked ships, and canyons deeper than the Grand Canyon. Now ask yourself, if the oceans disappeared, would the planet simply look different? Or would life as we know it end? Today, we're gonna walk through this impossible but fascinating scenario, step by step. What happens to the climate, the weather, animals, and us when Earth loses the one thing that makes it feel like Earth? Before we drain the planet dry, it helps to remember what the oceans actually do. Oceans cover about 71% of Earth's surface, and they contain about 97% of Earth's water. That's not trivia. That's the foundation of our climate and ecosystems. They also act like a giant thermal battery. The ocean has absorbed the vast majority of the excess heat trapped by greenhouse gases, on the order of about 90% in recent decades. And the ocean is one of our biggest carbon sponges, taking up roughly about a quarter of human carbon dioxide emissions each year. Plus, tiny ocean organisms called phytoplankton are responsible for roughly about half of the oxygen produced on Earth. So when we say, what if the oceans dried up, we're not talking about losing scenery. We're talking about ripping out the planet's radiator, humidifier, shipping highway, food pantry, and a major piece of the oxygen machine at the same time. Now let's imagine the oceans vanish overnight. Not a slow retreat, just gone. First, the geography becomes unrecognizable. The average depth of the ocean is around 3.7 kilometers, so sea level effectively drops by thousands of meters, exposing enormous new land. You wouldn't just see more beach, you'd see the entire seafloor, continental shelves, abyssal plains, underwater mountain ranges, and trenches deeper than the Grand Canyon. And the amount of water missing is mind-melting. The ocean holds about 1.332 billion cubic kilometers of water. Ports, harbors, and marinas become instantly useless. Shipping lanes vanish. But the most immediate changes aren't just about what you see, they're about what you feel. Because without oceans, Earth loses its main source of evaporation. That means the atmosphere starts drying out fast. No ocean evaporation means far less water vapor in the air. And water vapor is not only what makes clouds and rain, it's also the most abundant greenhouse gas in the atmosphere. So you get a double punch, a collapsing water cycle, and a radically altered heat balance. Here's the brutal part. The oceans aren't just where water lives, they're how the sky gets loaded with water in the first place. Today, most rainfall ultimately traces back to ocean evaporation. Remove the oceans and the global water cycle basically collapses. Clouds become rarer, storm systems weaken or transform. Inland regions already far from moisture dry out dramatically. You'd still have some water at first, lakes, rivers, groundwater, and ice. But without the constant ocean-driven evaporation engine, precipitation becomes limited and weirdly local. Then there's temperature. Oceans moderate climate because water stores heat efficiently. That's why coastal places tend to have milder summers and winters than inland areas. Remove the ocean and the planet becomes more like a gigantic continental interior. Expect hotter daytime highs in many regions, colder nighttime lows, more extreme seasonal swings. Now add another major change. Ocean currents stop existing. Right now, ocean circulation moves heat around the planet. It helps keep parts of Europe warmer than they otherwise might be at that latitude, for example. With no ocean, that heat conveyor belt disappears. So even if the average global temperature is hard to predict in a magical water vanish scenario, one thing is clear: Earth becomes more extreme, more chaotic, and much less hospitable. And don't forget what's now exposed, the seafloor. Much of it would become dry sediments and salts, easy for the wind to pick up. That means planet-scale dust storms, salt dust, mineral dust, and dead organic material becoming airborne. Breathing becomes dangerous in many regions. Agriculture becomes harder, and sunlight can be blocked or scattered in ways that further change climate. Now let's talk about life in the ocean. If the oceans dried up, most marine species would die almost immediately because their entire habitat is gone. That's not just fish and whales, that's coral, plankton, algae, mollusks, entire branches of the tree of life. And one group matters to everyone: phytoplankton. These microscopic organisms are a major reason the atmosphere has the oxygen levels we depend on. They're often described as producing around half of Earth's oxygen. If the oceans disappeared, phytoplankton ecosystems collapse. Oxygen wouldn't vanish overnight. Earth's atmosphere is huge, but over time, the planet's oxygen balance changes dramatically because you've removed an enormous producer at the base of the global food web. On land, it doesn't get better because ecosystems are interconnected. Seabirds lose food sources. Coastal ecosystems collapse. Species that rely on ocean humidity patterns, like forests influenced by coastal rain, start to fail. This becomes a chain reaction extinction event. Ocean life life first, then coastal life, then inland ecosystems stressed by drought, dust, and temperature extremes. Now let's make this personal. What happens to people when the oceans are gone? First, food shock. Seafood is a major protein source for billions. Globally, fish provides about 17% of animal protein on average, and much more in some coastal and island nations. No oceans means commercial fishing ends instantly. Aquaculture that depends on seawater collapses. Coastal economies built on fishing lose their foundation. Next, trade shock. Most international trade moves by sea because it's the cheapest way to move huge volumes. Cargo ships don't just stop. The entire logistics system rewires overnight at enormous cost. With ports useless and ships stranded, you get shortages, fuel, medicine ingredients, electronics components, food imports, everything that arrives by sea. Then, water prices. Even though oceans are salty, they still support freshwater supply through evaporation and rainfall, and many places use coastal desalination. Without oceans, desalination plants become irrelevant. Rain patterns collapse, rivers decline, groundwater becomes the last lifeline, and it gets overdrawn fast. And then, mass migration. A huge portion of humanity lives near coasts, often cited as around 40% of people living within 100 kilometers of the coast. But it's not just coastal people move inland. Many coastal cities would become uninhabitable due to collapsed trade and jobs, extreme dust and salt storms, loss of freshwater sources, and unstable new cliffs and landslide zones where shorelines used to be. So, borders strain, governments ration water and food, and people move, not because the sea rose, but because the sea left. And here's a twist. Some newly exposed land might look like opportunity, new minerals, new routes, new territory, but that land would largely be harsh, salty, unstable, dust-choked, and often far below the previous sea level in deep basins that become heat traps. Now zoom out. Give it centuries to millennia in our thought experiment, and Earth becomes a stranger. First, a new world map. With the seafloor exposed, you'd see features bigger than most people realize exist. The Mid-Atlantic Ridge, a mountain range that used to be underwater, now becomes a visible spine running across the Atlantic basin. Vast abyssal plains become salt deserts. Trenches become some of the deepest exposed valleys on Earth. Next, the carbon problem gets worse. Remember, the ocean currently absorbs a large share of our carbon dioxide emissions, roughly about a quarter. No ocean sink means more carbon dioxide stays in the atmosphere. At the same time, with less water vapor and potentially less cloud cover, the climate response becomes complex. The direction and magnitude of long-term temperature change would depend on what happens to land vegetation, likely stressed and reduced, ice and snow cover, which affects reflectivity, atmospheric dust, which can cool or warm depending on its properties, and the remaining water reservoirs. But what's not complex is habitability. Less rain, harsher temperature swings, more dust, collapsing ecosystems, a destabilized carbon cycle, and the sound of Earth changes. Without the ocean, you lose the constant background of waves, coastal wind patterns, marine ecosystems. The planet becomes quieter in one way and louder in another, with wind screaming across empty basins and salt flats. To really picture it, imagine these scenes. A container ship sitting on cracked ground, like a fossil of globalization. A coastline turned into a cliff edge, with abandoned cranes pointing at nothing. Former coral reefs bleached not because of warming, but because of exposure to open air. The sky turning hazy white from airborne salt dust. Rivers that once ran to the sea, now dying out in inland basins, because there is no sea to feed the sky with rain. And the strangest one of all, you could stand where the shore used to be and look down at Earth's exposed scars, ridges, trenches, and plains, like you're staring at another planet. The oceans drying up is fantasy, but the lesson is real. Oceans aren't optional. They are the climate stabilizer, the water cycle engine, a carbon and a massive pillar of biodiversity. And while the ocean won't vanish overnight, it can be pushed into states that are radically less friendly to life through warming, acidification, deoxygenation, and ecosystem collapse. So here's the question I want to leave you with. If removing the ocean breaks the world this completely, what happens when we simply damage it enough that it can't do its job? Because protecting the ocean isn't just about saving whales or beaches. It's about keeping Earth recognizable. What's one ocean fact that surprised you? Comment below. If you want more what-if science scenarios like this, subscribe and tell me what world-ending question you want next.